Deputies, good morning, Deputies. Deputies, could you take your seats, please? May I invite deputies and visitors, please, to take your seats. Ask over there, I don't know, off the top of my head. Deputies, please, deputies. Danny, Ivan, Chev. Yeah, I've spoken to him. He's offering us 25k a year, as far as I can see. I'm going to go and see his... He's upset?
How are you?
About what? Oh yeah, his what? Father, no, it's in here. It's in here. I've got it here.
Which is mine, I can't see from behind.
Nice to see you.
Again.
See you. Do you come to see you? You're here for the opening. To see you.
How are you doing? You've got a tough job. I hope you will come.
Thank you. Sit down, delighted to have you with us. Here. Deputies, we must begin. We've got a busy meeting. Deputies, you need to be on your best behaviour because in case you haven't noticed, His Excellency Ambassador Mark Regev has arrived at the boards early and he's watching. So can we please live up to the occasion, as I know you will. Deputies, welcome to the first board meeting after the Pesach break, and I hope everyone had a meaningful Pesach. Some of you may be aware that today is something of a milestone because it is the first anniversary of your team of honorary officers elected exactly a year ago. And I was about to say that the honeymoon's over, but I'm slightly encouraged that it may not be. Deputies, just to supplement the personal announcements, I want to correct the one that we made last time. Malvin Benjamin had a granddaughter. She didn't become engaged, she was born. She's a very precocious young lady. I would also like to add, on a more serious note, to this week's, we got the news too late to include in the printed version, but I would like to wish Noam Tamir Chayim Aruchim on the passing of his father. I particularly would like to welcome Noam back. We've mentioned him in the last two presidential statements because he had some very serious surgery and his son performed a heroic mitzvah of donating part of his liver to save Noam's life. And Noam, that was a real act of pikuach nefesh on the part of your son, and we are so pleased to see you back here with us looking so well. On which score, for the generations, Noam's father-in-law, Sir Sigmund Sternberg, will, please God, attain the wonderful age of 95 on the 2nd of June. And we hope, Noam, that you will send Sir Sigmund, who has been such a wonderful, important, significant supporter of the Board of Deputies, our heartfelt greetings, and may he retain all his health and strength for years to come. Deputies, we have a really full and interesting meeting today. We have His Excellency the Israeli ambassador with us because it is the nearest meeting to Yom Ha'atzmaut, this week saw Yom HaZikaron, where we remembered the fallen who died so that we have Medinat Yisrael today, going into the 68th anniversary of Yom HaTzmaut, something particularly meaningful for all of us, especially to me this week when I was in Israel, when my son made Aliyah. I would also, in that vein, like to welcome the group from Israel who are with us today, of younger people, tough-knit group, learning about our communal democracy and life in Chutz La'aretz. I'd also like to mention that on the 19th of June, when we have our next board meeting, in the morning, the meeting being in the afternoon, is the Maccabi Fun Run. And I shall once again risk being made a total fool of by saying I intend to run 10 kilometres, and my challenge to every deputy of whatever age, shape or size to run alongside me. You won't have too much trouble keeping up, and we will run together for Tzedakah, a charity of your choice. And I hope to see as many deputies as possible supporting the fun run and preferably participating in it. If all of you came in your running gear, we will have a marvellous meeting in the afternoon because we'll all be so tired. The debate might be a bit quieter. Following the President's statement and questions, we're going to have to curtail it, I'm afraid, because we have so much on our agenda today. We will have the enormous privilege of hearing Ambassador Regev, and after the other parts of the meeting that you will have seen in your agenda, we are going to have a debate on the European referendum. It's one of the, if not the first such occasion in the board. None of us can remember anything like this before, and we are delighted that we will be welcoming, there'll be a short break, and then we'll be welcoming, I think, over 70 members of the Jewish public who have come as our guests to listen to it. Yes?
I think because your President's statement's going to take longer, the ambassador's got to be away by about 5 to. I think we do him now.
Oh, okay. You're now doing now. Out of respect. Okay.
I think so.
All right.
David Simmons, Northwood and Pinner Liberal Synagogue. The Board of Deputies is not a political body. The issue of the EU referendum is totally political. Therefore, I question the legitimacy, can't even say the word this morning, of discussing that issue here this morning, taking up valuable time when we could be discussing things more close to home.
Thank you, David. David, it was clear we were responding to the wish of deputies to have it, and so I think it's going to be very interesting, and it will help us all to make up our own judgments. I think given our timing, we will have the President's statement, but out of respect to the Ambassador, I would like, and I know you all want to hear him, it gives me the greatest pleasure to introduce His Excellency Mark Regev, who for a number of years before he came to London was the spokesman, the press spokesman of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. As such, Ambassador Regev is very well known to us all. He hails originally from Australia, but he's not particularly interested in cricket, which saves a bit of needle when we have a test match. Ambassador Regev is an outstanding spokesman for Israel, and I would commend to everyone to watch his clip on the Andrew Marr show of 2 weeks ago, and you might also see his speech online on YouTube to the Oxford Union just over a week ago. If you want to see how to answer some of the slurs that are hurled against Israel, you should listen to how Ambassador Mark Regev deals with them, because it's a lesson to all of us. Ambassador, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Board of Deputies. We were delighted that the first function you came to on taking up your ambassadorship was to the Board's dinner, and I would invite you to address the Board. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those kind remarks, Jonathan. I don't think it's a coincidence that I've been here just over a month and this is my second event with the board. I think it shows how active you are, the important work you're doing, you and the entire team. And I thank you. I thank everyone who's involved in the board activities. I said when we met the first time, the board has a proud history of representing British Jewry, and I have no doubt that the board has a vibrant future as well. The challenges are there, and British Jewry has to be united in meeting those challenges. I also want to say something personal. One of your delegates here tonight I have known for 25 years. When I was much younger, and they sent me from the Foreign Ministry to be the Deputy Consul, that's very low down on the totem pole, yes, the Deputy Consul in Hong Kong. Anne Godfrey was the head of the Jewish community there. And it's a pleasure, Anne, 25 years later, that we're still attending the same events. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? As ambassador, you don't want to repeat yourself too much. And I don't want to repeat anything that I said last time I met the board or anything I said at the various Independence Day functions. And I was thinking, what can I say this morning that I haven't said? What can I say this morning that is new? And I was, perturbed. One doesn't want to be a parrot repeating oneself over and over again. And this morning on my way here, I was going through my Twitter feed. I'm addicted, I admit it. Maybe some of you are as well. And I saw that there are groups this morning in the United Kingdom who are celebrating what they call Nakba Day. Now, Nakba is an Arabic word for catastrophe. We, Jews, we celebrated this week Independence Day, Israel's 68th anniversary of our independence. And we celebrate that in a very real way because I think all of us can think for a moment what it would be like without a state of Israel. Where would Jews be today without a state of Israel? What happened to the Jewish people before there was a state of Israel? And so I think Jews across the board unite in celebrating our reclaimed sovereignty and independence. But those people today who are commemorating the so-called Nakba Day, I ask them the following question. Why aren't you too celebrating 68 years of independence? Why is the Palestinian state not celebrating 68 years of independence as Israel is celebrating? And they never want to answer that question. But that is the historic fact. The UN partition proposal, UNSCOP, said 2 states for 2 peoples, a Palestinian state for the Palestinian people and a Jewish state for the Jewish people. And maybe some of you have seen the old black and white newsreels of people in Tel Aviv sitting next to their radios, there weren't televisions back there in 1947, and listening to the UN vote. And the list of countries being read out, and one by one, the Jews marking it off. And when we got a 2/3 majority, there was spontaneous celebration in Tel Aviv. People went out and danced the horror. It was an amazing victory. We embraced the UN partition proposal. We said yes to a Jewish state, even though we knew it would be a small Jewish state. Even though we knew the Jewish state's future was precarious, we celebrated the fact that the international community had given us sovereignty in part of our historic homeland. We didn't reject that resolution. We embraced the 2 states for 2 peoples concept. What did the Palestinians do? What was the response of Palestinian political leadership? They said no. They said all or nothing. They said no to a Jewish state, not in any borders. They said no to the establishment of a Palestinian state because it meant reconciling themselves in parallel to there being a Jewish state as their neighbor. They said all or nothing, and they ended up getting nothing. So who is to blame for the fact that we don't celebrate today together? Who is to blame for the fact that the Palestinians do not have a state of their own? Is it Israel? Is it the Zionists who said yes to 2 states for 2 peoples? And unfortunately, this wasn't a one-off event. Over the last decades, the Palestinians have been, on numerous occasions, offered sovereignty and independence, offered a state of their own. It goes back before the UN partition proposals. The Palestinians were offered a state first time by the British in 1937, the Peel Commission. They said no then. They said no in 1947. They said no at Camp David again in 2000, and they said no again in 2008. Their problem has been that they've refused to accept a Palestinian state if it means they have to live in peace and accept the legitimacy of a Jewish state. And anyone who really wants to understand this conflict in the Middle East, the fundamental key to understanding the conflict has to be this consistent factor that unfortunately, until today, Palestinians refuse to reconcile themselves to our right to live in sovereignty in any part of our historic homeland. They refuse to accept the legitimacy of the Jewish state in any borders. And I fail to understand how we can get peace without that. In fact, peace is impossible without that. The same Palestinians that go around the world and say you have to accept Palestinian right to national self-determination, that the Palestinians have a right to a state, why do they refuse to accept our right to national self-determination? Why do they reject the Jewish people's right to national self-determination in part of our historic homeland? Now, as much as I know that Palestinian acceptance of the Jewish people's right to national self-determination is essential and a key element in any future peace agreement, I want you to know something, and the Prime Minister repeated it on Independence Day this week. We make no preconditions whatsoever on entering peace talks. Obviously, our position is that if there is to be a peace agreement, the Palestinians have to recognize our right, the Jewish people's right to national self-determination. But we don't make that a precondition for entering peace talks. On the contrary, Prime Minister Netanyahu reiterated this week, we are willing to start peace talks immediately with the Palestinian leadership without any preconditions whatsoever, anywhere, anytime. We want peace. We believe peace is ultimately in our benefit as it's in their benefit. And the only way to achieve that peace is in direct talks where the Palestinians will put on the table what concerns them and we'll put on the table what concerns us. That's the only way forward. And from our point of view, we need to hear, for there to be an agreement, we need to finally hear from the Palestinians that they are willing to accept our legitimacy as a Jewish state, as a state, the only state where the Jewish people have national self-determination. I think I'll finish with those remarks. I thank you all.
The Ambassador will take a few questions, if there are some. So if anyone would like to ask a question, would they like to show, please? I can see Denise, followed by, sorry, behind you there, Barbara, thank you very much indeed. And yes, sir, is that Mervyn? Is it Mervyn? Is it? Hmm?
I can't see.
Yes, sir. Do you want to come up? We'll take 3 questions together to the microphone.
Denise Lester, Deputy for South Hampstead United Synagogue. In the UK in particular, there is an ever-present situation where pro-Palestinian supporters engage in a conflation of attacking Israel and attacking British Jews. And there is a conflation. do you have any observations or any remarks? Because there is, arguably, although they do not say there is, the conflation which becomes anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Barbara Simon, Harry Haim, Manchester. Mr. Ambassador, like you, I am second generation. My father was a German refugee, and I was appalled at the unreported world that was actually on Seder night, but I'd recorded it, that showed the poverty of Holocaust survivors.
Mr. Ambassador, Mervyn Smith, Sutton. The situation with regard to the amount of funds that goes into the Palestinian Authority, the abuses and the level of abuses that may or may not be taking place, but to my knowledge in history, where there's been an occupation, as in Germany after the war, as in Japan, economic miracles took place. The Palestinians see an economic miracle having taken place on its doorstep. How does one present this tragedy that they cannot see what could be achieved in the circumstances that are presented to them?
I thank you for those questions. On the first question, you raise an issue that people say, well, I'm not against Jews, I'm just against Israel. I'm just against those terrible Zionists who are Nazi, fascist, imperialist, colonialist, apartheid supporters, right? It's not anti-Semitism, they'll say. They've got nothing against Jews, some of their best friends. In fact, some have had Jewish girlfriends. Let's be clear. What is anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is holding the Jews to a standard that you hold no one else to. It's an irrational hatred for Jews. Now, if you are out there and you are waving flags of different peoples and you say, this people has a group, this people has a right to national self-determination, and that people have a right to national self-determination, and that people over there have a right to national self-determination. But you say, the Jews don't have that right. All right? I'll say that again. You support that people's right to national self-determination, you support that people's right to self-determination, but you say, no, the people who don't have a right to national self-determination, that's the Jewish people. What's that all about? What's that all about? I think that's the question that has to be asked. Why is this group's of national aspirations, that's justified, that's even progressive, that's good for humanity, but the fact that the Jewish people would ask for the same right, that's terrible, that's evil. And then you get to this whole thing where Israel, the Jewish state, is targeted with the same slurs and the same libels that the Jewish people have been targeted with, and you have this overlap. It was once the Jews that were poisoning worlds. The Jews were a threat to world peace. The Jews were responsible for all the evil in the world. Today it's the collective Jew. It's the Jewish state. It's Israel that is the embodiment of evil for all too many. It's the new anti-Semitism, and I think that's the ultimate truth. And you see that most specifically, and here I will repeat myself, and I apologize, Jonathan. You see that specifically in the Hamas Charter, which unfortunately is just one example of many. But the Hamas Charter doesn't just say Israel should be wiped off the map and terrorism is a good thing. We all know that, right? That's what Hamas is about. But if you read closely the Hamas Charter, it says the most outrageous things. It says Jews were responsible for and profited from the two world wars. It's straight out of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. There's a whole chapter there in the Hamas Charter how the Zionists want to corrupt the values of Muslim women. You get this, it's classic anti-Semitism. When people say, oh, it's nothing against Jews, actually look what they say. I think I answered the first question, at least I hope I did. On the issue of Holocaust survivors, where's the woman who asked that question? No. I want to be as straightforward as I can. We can never do enough to support Holocaust survivors. We can never do enough. And we have invested untold sums in trying to support Holocaust survivors. We could always do more. I'm sure the community here could do more. We in Israel could do more as well. There's never more than enough. I can say with a certain amount of pride, even though I know we haven't done enough and we can never do enough, is over the last few years, Israel has really radically increased the support we give to Holocaust survivors. So their last years, because unfortunately, for obvious reasons, there are less and less of them around, but we have radically increased the amount of support we're giving. But I'll tell you frankly, it'll never be enough. And that's the truth. On the last question about funding to the Palestinian Authority and the economic development of Israel, I remember when we pulled out of Gaza. Where's the gentleman who asked the question? I want to look at him. Yeah. I remember when we pulled out of Gaza. There was a meeting here in Scotland of I think it was still then the G7, and they promised billions of dollars in support for Gaza after Israel pulled out. The idea was we pull out, and the international community moves in with a very, very significant investment program, decide to give what they called a disengagement benefit to the people of Gaza. And none of that happened. Why? And this is the fundamental tragedy of the situation. You have a group that runs Gaza that's not interested in the welfare of the Palestinian people. You have a group that runs Gaza that puts its jihad above and beyond the interests of the people in Gaza. And we've seen that all too often, unfortunately. If people really wanted to be partners in economic development, if people really wanted to be partners in building a better future, they would find no better partner than the State of Israel. And that's the truth. But if you have a leadership that puts its struggle against Israel above all, that says no to a Palestinian state because that means accepting Israel, they refuse to do so. And ultimately their agenda is nihilistic. Or do I say in Britain nihilistic? I don't know. What does one say in Britain? You don't know. Nihilistic. All right, you understood. And that's what it's all about. Their hatred for Jews, for the Jewish state, is so all-encompassing, it allows them to throw away opportunities that would obviously benefit their own people greatly. I mean, ultimately, Israel wants peace. I said before, I'll say it again, Prime Minister Netanyahu again reiterated that he wants to see a solution of 2 states for 2 peoples, where Israel can live in security by a Palestinian state that finally recognizes the Jewish state. That's the solution. That's the way where we want to go. But do we have a Palestinian partner? Up until now, sadly, we haven't.
Ambassador, we know you have one of the busiest diaries in the world, so we thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate not just your being here, but your warm words about the Board of Deputies and for sharing your thoughts with us today. On behalf of everybody in the room and no doubt the British Jewish community, we welcome you to the UK. We wish you every success in your new role as Ambassador of Israel to the United Kingdom. We look forward to engaging with you on further occasions. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Deputies, I will come straight to the President's statement. I see that we have Deputy Roy Lewis from Sheffield with us. Roy, we are so pleased that you have recovered. We are so grateful for you facilitating our successful regional meeting in Sheffield in March, and we're delighted that you're restored and back with us. Deputies, the first matter in the statement is anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and I anticipate that there are people who will wish to speak on this. I'm just going to introduce it by saying one thing. In the last week, I have had to sit through the frankly rather humiliating experience in meetings in Sweden and in Israel of having to listen to politicians from other countries and Jewish commoner leaders cite the United Kingdom as an example of growing anti-Semitism in the heart of one of our major political parties. And I can't tell you how disappointed I was and am that the UK has been placed in this position by events going on in our public life, principally, but certainly not solely in the Labour Party. I am glad that there are going to be there's going to be an independent inquiry, and we're also going to see the results of Baroness Royal's inquiry. But I'm frankly disappointed in what I see as the less than wholehearted support of the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. And I shall once again, here, as I have done several times in the past few weeks, say now to the leader of the Labour Party, it's time that he indicated a genuine support and a proactive attitude to the abuses going on under his nose in his party, instead of giving every impression of being forced to do so by media and public pressure. And it is time, Mr. Corbyn, that once and for all you now tell the British public that when you sat down with anti-Semites before you became the leader, that was not an appropriate thing to do, and as leader of the British political party, it is not appropriate to do now, and that you will not be repeating those meetings. Anyone have wish to comment on my statement on this subject? Yes, I'm going to call first on Louise Ellman, Member of Parliament for Liverpool. Is it Riverside? Thank you. Louise.
Louise Ellman, MP, Jewish Labour Movement. I too, Mr. President, have expressed my very strong concern about the slowness of the reaction of the leader of the Labour Party in dealing with what is a very serious issue. I do want to make it clear that this involves a minority of the Labour Party, and it was pressure from members of the Labour Party, including MPs, as well as pressure from outside, which eventually did cause the leader to take action. And Labour Party members are appalled at what is happening. I think it is vitally important that the board now continues to play a very important role in addressing this. Yes, it is good that we have this inquiry, but it is vital that the inquiry keeps focused on anti-Semitism. Its terms of reference are wider than that. And it's very important indeed that the inquiry hears very, very clearly from the representative body of the Jewish community in this country about the impact of what is happening on the Jewish community as a whole and on community relations. I think there is a danger that the inquiry could get bogged down into academic discussion and debate about what constitutes anti-Semitism, what constitutes anti-Zionism, and the relationship between the two. We as a community know that what is happening is wrong, it is deeply damaging, and it is incumbent on the Labour Party to take action on this. And I also think it is extremely important that questions continue to be asked about the Royal Report. That's the report which has been conducted and I believe concluded by Jan Royal, Lady Royal, looking into allegations of very serious allegations of anti-Semitism at Oxford Labour Club. That inquiry has been completed to the best of my knowledge, and I think that very important questions should continue to be asked about when that inquiry is going to be published. published, and whether it be published in its own right or as part of a completely different inquiry, which indeed has been set up by the leader's office rather than by the Labour Party. I'm very clear that this is an appalling situation. Many Labour members of Parliament continue to pursue this. The Jewish Labour movement has been very active in pursuing this from the start, has pressurised the leader's office, has put forward proposals for rule changes and for changes in the way the Labour Party operates, and I believe they will have considerable success. So I just say to the board, in the few words I'm able to say this morning, the board has a vital part to play on behalf of our community. It must continue to play it, and that means continual questioning, continual pressure on the Labour Party and on its inquiry to make sure it addresses this very serious issue, this virus in our midst. And I assure you that the vast majority of Labour members of Parliament and the vast majority of Labour Party members are behind us in all of this. Thank you.
Who's that over there? Yes.
Warren Usden, Yeshurun Hebrew Congregation, South Manchester. I would just like some confirmation that the board is alive to any dangers that might be inherent in the independent inquiry that has been set up. In particular, Louise alluded to the terms of reference. I'm not sure what the terms of reference are, but in particular, in order to carry out its work, the independent inquiry will have to arrive at a definition of anti-Semitism. And I'm wondering how much input the board is going to have into the terms of reference, into giving evidence to the Commission, and into that definition, because it's possible that the independent inquiry arrives at a definition of anti-Semitism which precludes certain elements of anti-Zionism and thereby sets a standard for others in public life which may not be consistent with the needs of our community.
I'm particularly looking for deputies who don't speak all that often, and I will give them priority, as I always said that I would do. So if I'm not immediately responding to hands, it's because I really would like deputies who sometimes feel inhibited from speaking or coming forward now to have their chance, and then I will try and call as many people as possible. It's possible I won't be able to satisfy everyone. If any deputy would like to speak who's not usually a speaker on these matters, Stephen Games, and yes, you, sir. Yeah.
Stephen Games from Muswell Hill. I've written to the board a number of times, and I've had meetings with other people in the Jewish community about what I think is the Jewish community's failure to understand the nature of the radical left. We argue facts all the time, and in that 21-page feature that the Jewish Chronicle produced a week ago about anti-Semitism, there was merely, at best, a pitting of facts against facts. And I think what we seem not to understand in our community is that the left has a different approach to its raw material. It theoretizes. Its ideas come out of Marxism, post-Marxist thought. And this runs through the left, and it runs through the thinking of the Muslim, Arab, radical world. And we don't think that way. We don't know how to think that way. We don't really understand the way in which ideas are constructed on the left. And I've said a number of times to the board that we must do some research into this. We need to find a way of understanding and taking the construction of ideas that supports the threats to our existence and turning those ideas back against them We're not doing this. We're simply saying, we say the things that make us feel good about ourselves, but we need to understand and talk in the language of our enemies so that we can disempower our enemies, so that we can use their arguments against themselves. And I call once again on the board to put funding into this understanding of the language and the theoritizing of ideas that exist on the left. If we don't do this, we are not going to win this argument.
Kim.
Kim Cohen, Northwood United Synagogue. We've seen before the council elections most recently a lot of publicity about how the Labour Party were going to be decimated in the council elections. They were going to lose hundreds of seats, lots of councils, whatever. And in the final analysis, Jeremy Corbyn came away with losing one council. And what I want to ask the President and the Board is what conclusions can we draw from that about the general feeling of the general population in voting for a policy that was very much out there on the table. Anti-Semitism was lobbied and levied against Jeremy Corbyn, and he came away very lightly and almost emboldened now that he still got voted in. Does that say anything about the society that we live in terms of anti-Semitism? Should we be worrying more about the general electorate and what their feelings are? Thank you.
I'll answer those questions, and then we really must move on. First of all, to Louise Ellman. Louise, can I say once again, the board strongly applauds and supports your efforts and those of so many of your colleagues in the Parliamentary Labour Party. It takes a lot of courage to speak up in the face of so much abuse, including abuse you've suffered in your own constituency, as has your Liverpool colleague Luciana Berger and other Labour MPs, and we are absolutely behind you. We welcome everything you said. I wouldn't disagree with a word of it. And can I say how important I think the community should feel that now within Labour we have a Jewish Labour movement that has been strengthened and has invigorated and is taking on the battle from the inside, using the position which the Jewish Labour movement has as a highly respected, I think the oldest group within in constitutional recognition by Labour other than the Fabian Society. And this battle needs to take place, and we have many friends there in Labour. It's not about the whole of the Labour Party, and I therefore wholeheartedly thank you for your contribution. To Warren. Warren, I can tell you that we are acutely alive to all the things that could or could not come out of the independent inquiry. I can confirm that the board will be among those leading the community's response by giving submissions to the inquiry. And we will do promise you, the absolute best job we can. I don't want to get hung up on definitions, and I'm not absolutely sure that the inquiry will itself pronounce on a definition, but let's be clear about this. This is a Labour Party inquiry. It is not, whatever it results in, it's not going to be written in stone. If the inquiry report is something that we can support, we will support it. If it's not something we feel we can support, we're entirely not inhibited from saying so. We will do our very best. It's an independent inquiry. We have already indicated some misgivings about it, as you're seeing from the reference in my statement. But yes, we are very, of course, alive to what can happen. And as I know from my daily work, when you put yourself in front of an independent judge, all sorts of interesting results can happen. Stephen Games, I take your point. My own view is that the radical left's arguments are actually very well answered from within the community by other academics, people like David Hirsch, who was recently a member of the Labour Party until he stepped down. And he does answer it in their language, and I recommend you look at the mailings of Engage. My own view is that this is a battle that we have to win in the court of public opinion. I'm not sure I would want to indulge in polemics about Marxism or answering them in quite their coin. I think we have to win the battle of ideas with the public. And I want to take one positive thing out of the recent episode, unhappy though it is, and unhappy that it's become a party political issue, and it's not a place I would like to see the Jewish community to be. But let's take this positive out of it. It is clear, I think, to me, that not just anti-Semitism, but opposition to the existence of the State of Israel has become an event which of itself justifies administrative suspension from the Labour Party as a prelude to disciplinary inquiries. I think we should take some hope from that. And to Kim Cain, of course, I think you make a very fair point about the recent elections, but senior Labour personalities themselves said that their prospects and their votes had been damaged by the controversy. And I think it's going to continue to dog them. And Louise Ellman, Member of Parliament, made the same point. So this is a battle we're going to have to continue to fight. And in conclusion, what I want to say, echoing the words of the Chief Rabbi a few nights ago at Yom Ha'atzmaut, when Jews are under attack and Zionism is under attack, I want to say on behalf of all of us that I am proud to be Jewish and proud to be a Zionist. Election of Sadiq Khan. Anyone wish to? No one has to feel they need to say anything about that. Again, I want to be very positive about it. I'm cautiously optimistic that Sadiq Khan will live up to his pre-election promises and will continue the excellent start he has made on engagement with the community. I particularly hope that Mayor Sadiq Khan will grow into an outstanding political role model for minorities in this country, including British Muslims. British Muslims look to senior political figures for leadership, as we all do. And he comes from amongst them. And I would like to be as optimistic as I can that he will fulfill that role with distinction. President's dinner. It's a month since we had a dinner which by common consent was a huge success. I would like to thank all of you deputies who came and supported. We might have had even more deputies coming, especially as there was no money needed up front. But I'm very pleased to say that many of you did come, that we had almost 500 people there and basically packed out the hall we had. We had an excellent evening with Ambassador Regev and guest of honor David Miliband. We are already planning for next year. And I'm also pleased to say that while the returns are not in yet, I think we have hit a target which we set of being very profitable in a dinner, not enough that's going to keep us going for years and years and we can have board meetings in Bermuda, but nevertheless doing a lot to address our financial situation and putting us in a position where we can deliver the resources which you ask of us. And I thank everyone who was concerned with the dinner, and particularly Sheila and her team. Sheila chaired the dinner committee, and I'm very grateful to her for agreeing to chair Board Dinner 2017. Watch this space. I know. The launch of the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish manifestos. Anything on that? I think what we've said speaks for itself. I feel that we have done a lot to empower small local communities in the regions, and I'm very proud of the board's role. Safeguarding of Hebrew at GCSE and A-level. I'd like to thank Sarah Perlmutter from the board's team. She is here. Hello, Sarah. The team at our office did an absolutely outstanding job. This is one of those things which we can proudly cite at the board. It's not just about anti-Semitism and defence and reactiveness. This is doing great things for our community. We won a real political result here, and it's a tribute to the political lobbying of your Board of Deputies. And before I ask for any other comments, I want to mention that Natan Levy, Rabbi Levy, the board's interfaith and social affairs officer, will be moving on to pastures fresh in a few weeks' time. I don't think Rabbi Natan is here today, but I would like to offer our thanks to him for his wonderful creativity, his ability to cross boundaries of faith and indeed boundaries within our community. With his freshness, his energy, and his originality. We shall miss Natan Levy enormously. We shall shortly be advertising for his successor, and I hope if any of you deputies have some ideas about who might fill the distinctive role left by Rabbi Natan, please come forward, and we will certainly thank again Rabbi Levy. Now, we've had a number of questions which I've answered, and in order to save time and also so that people don't get an unnecessary number of bites at the cherry, I'm not going to ask those who asked questions which have been answered to come back. I'm going to instead turn very quickly to the Executive Committee report, because I don't think it raises any different items, so we can take the two together. The one matter which calls for your approval, as I hope you will, in the executive report, is the publication of the board plan for this triennium working towards 2018. You should have received copies with your papers, electronically or hard copy downstairs. This is a very fine publication. It's a roadmap, if you like. It doesn't say everything we're going to do and every way we're going to do it, but it is a constitutional requirement to set a pathway for this triennium. And while I'm sorry, and I should take some responsibility for it not having been put before the board before, we have had quite a lot of things on our plate to do. I'll take a couple of comments on it. Yes? Yes. Natalie. Sorry, I'm just not, brain's not working today.
Thank you very much. I'd like to commend the report, but just before perhaps it's published and before we make a decision on it, is it possible that the picture showing Nisa Nashim could be altered to show both members of a Jewish community and also a Muslim community? It seems to me that if I was to show this within my particular constituency, it may not necessarily show interfaith work in quite a positive, collaborative approach. I know that it says Jewish, Muslim, but the picture doesn't actually profess that. So I'd ask perhaps it would be a picture which shows both communities working together. Thank you.
We'll look at the photographs. Thank you for that point, Natalie. But I think I get the feeling that in general we have board's approval for the plan for the way forward. This is not an occasion to try and redraft every word of it. But could you indicate by a show of hands, please, whether you broadly welcome this plan for the triennium and are happy to give it your approval? Could you show? Thank you. Is anyone would like to show against? Thank you very much indeed, deputies, and I think it's actually, despite being a constitutional requirement, I think it's the first time in quite a number of years that the requirement has actually been honoured. So I'm glad we've done that. Thank you very much. One moment. There'll now be a couple of minutes for any other questions or matters relating to the President's statement or the Executive Committee. Yes, do you want to come forward? Jerry Lewis will be afterwards and Talal Fair, and that's probably all we'll have time for. You need to come forward to the microphone.
As David Farby, Finchley Reform, good morning everyone. Going back to the board plan, I'm delighted about this. It is in the Constitution and it's a major element in the Constitution. I myself raised this as a question some 4 meetings ago, and here we have the plan. The Constitution does say that the plan should be produced shortly after the triennial period starts, but nevertheless, we've got it. But what the Constitution also says is that the honorary officers, having adopted the plan, must give regular playbacks and feedbacks to the deputies on the progress of the plan, so that the deputies can monitor specifically how the plan has been going over the months. So good for the plan, but can we have an undertaking that that other part of the Constitution will also be observed, that we'll get regular reports back, because that's what the Constitution says.
Thank you, David. Jerry Lewis.
Jerry Lewis.
Jerry, one question. One matter, not three, please.
Doesn't say so in the Constitution. Jerry Lewis, Hampstead Synagogue. First of all, could I just remind the top table that us deputies voted 2 meetings ago to retain our old system of seating, and I do think it's right that the top table listen to what deputies actually say. Can I just make one point very clear, and this is to cover both areas of the concerns I have. Our relationship with the different political parties is not enhanced by trying to take party sides, as appeared the case during the mayoral elections. Whilst I have supported what the President has done in recent weeks with regard to the Labour Party, there were at times concerns that he was attacking one of the parties prior to the mayoral elections in ways which was not reasonable or acceptable. We have a problem at the moment with the Liberal Democrats in that David Ward has reappeared and is now on Bradford Council. We need to make sure that we have discussions with the leadership of the Lib Dems. For my sins, tomorrow morning, at this time, I shall be at the press conference being given by Sami Chakrabarti and David Feldman. And whilst you have welcomed initially the meeting, the introduction of an investigation, with all due respect, the two individuals concerned are not as clean as we would like them to be, and I'm worried that unless we make our views known about the people involved in that committee of inquiry before they come to results, we're going to have a problem. I'll just give one quick indication.
Jerry, you're on amber.
You interrupted me before I'd even started my speech, sir. Sami Chakrabarti I challenged 3 years ago during the Gaza war. And I challenged her on one simple thing. Why was she giving more concern about the human rights of the people in Gaza being fired on by Israel than the human rights of Israelis being fired on by these terrorists, etc.? And she did not give an adequate answer. In those circumstances, and also David Feldman's stance, where he can't even recognise what anti-Semitism actually is, according to the proper definitions, I think we've got very good grounds to say that we have a problem and we should be making our views known. I do thank you for being bold enough to stand up so far. Corbyn was on television this morning. He did make very clear Hamas and Hezbollah are not his friends. I don't make any excuses for the guy, but I think we need to pursue the concerns over the membership of that committee of inquiry properly. Thank you.
Talo for Chigwell Haynot Synagogue. My question relates to the Code of Conduct. Given the number of complaints being raised since its introduction, and in the interest of transparency, would the President agree to release a quarterly statements of the number of complaints and the outcomes of the complaints, so deputies would be aware what's been going on? Because there is not much clarity of how many complaints been done, how many were upheld, before I ask this question. So can we introduce a quarterly statement in regards to the number of complaints and the outcomes of these complaints? Thank you.
I'll just answer those points very briefly. David Farby. David, the Constitution requires us to issue this plan where practical. It's proved practical to do it. Thank you for reminding us, and we'll continue to do our best to live up to the requirements of our current Constitution. Tal, I've no objection at all to continuing to release these statistics. Whether quarterly is too frequently or not, I'm not sure, but periodically, I don't see why we can't, because it's not secret. Jerry, there's a sort of contradiction in what you said. On the one hand, you You applauded us speaking out about problems in the Labour Party. On the other hand, you said we shouldn't do it before an election. Well, I must say, whatever I said before the election of the mayor was far exceeded by what senior Labour personalities were saying, including Sadiq Khan himself, who before the election said very clearly, in words of one syllable, my chances are being damaged by this. And I never said anything quite so blunt as that, nor would I. But can I just say this? If I, as leader of this board, cannot speak out against anti-Semitism at any place, at any time, then I wouldn't deserve to have this role. Deputies, before we have a very short break for people to vote, and I'll say something about that in a moment, and then we'll start at 12:30 our EU referendum debate. You have before you the 4 reports of the updating of the divisions, and I want to put them before you, and if there are any brief points, we'll have a short time to take them. I'll start with Community and Education Division, Sheila Giwob.
Thank you. No, it's not. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, everybody. Okay, very briefly, and under 30 seconds. We have no election for the vacancy on the Community and Education Division because in the end there was just one candidate. I would like to welcome and congratulate Nick Beck to our dynamic and wonderful division where everybody has so much energy and we're doing such good things, and I'm sure you'll be a big asset. Thank you and welcome. Thank you. I would just like to draw your attention to the fact that the Jewish Living exhibition is going to Wrexham in North Wales from June the 6th, when there will be a launch, and from the 7th to the 17th, apart from Shabbat. There will be the school visits, a whole program. We are looking, please, for volunteers to approach us to find out if they can help at all. This has all been arranged very quickly because Wrexham came to us with a date. I've been working on this. It was sponsored by the Welsh Assembly member Mark Isherwood, and he has been trying for over a year to find a suitable venue. Wrexham came back to me and said, we would love to have it. They're very excited. Nowhere in this area of the UK where there is no Jewish community has there ever been anything like this, and please, if you think you can help us with the school sessions, we need Jewish volunteers. Please see me or contact Sarah or Jewish Living. Thank you. And the third thing is, based on the exhibition, there are associated costs which are always difficult to find funding for, whether a community or other people who can help. It has been suggested that we actually replicate this exhibition and have it housed in various locations throughout the UK to eliminate the need for transportation costs. So with this in mind and looking at the very limited resources we have, I am asking every deputy, please, for the next June board meeting, if you can let us have any good quality, unused or surplus to requirement Jewish artifacts focusing on the Shabbat, please bring them to the next meeting. Thank you. And now I'm happy to take any comments or questions on the report. Thank you.
Any urgent questions? I'm not going to encourage, because time is very short. Yes, very briefly, if you would.
Thank you. Hi, David. Congratulations. Leicester have actually
You
now
never know where David May comes from, will you?
Leicester. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Deputies,
Thank
I'm
you
also
very
conscious
much.
that there are deputies here from possibly Newcastle, so can we be kind, please?
Mr. President, honorary officers, it took 530 years for Leicester to find and bury King Richard III. It has taken 124 years for Leicester City Football Club to win the Premier League title. However, it has only taken 4 months from inception to realisation with the help of Sarah Perlmutter and her team, together with Sheila, for Leicester to be the first city in the country to be the owners of our own full-scale, SACRE-approved Jewish living experience. This remarkable achievement has been realised with a very generous donation by a non-Jewish lady passionate about the education of the next generation and was given in memory of her dear parents. Just as our football team gives aspiration to others to achieve what on the surface may seem the impossible, so the acquisition of this incredible educational exhibition should inspire other communities around the country to own one. If we are to fight anti-Semitism, then educating the populace must be the starting point. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
I don't think that needs an answer. No. I'm going to move on. David, please convey the board's congratulations again. I'm going to call on Stuart to present the F&O report.
Okay, I'll be quick. We're
They didn't wait 123 years.
It's my first time as president, so I blame my predecessors. Stuart.
I couldn't agree more, given that I support Chelsea too. Anyway, I'm going to be very quick. We are momentarily in surplus. It's lovely, but it is momentary, and there are nuances to that which I've tried to make plain in the report. I just urge all of you to come forward with any ideas. Some people have been putting forward very good ones that you have for fundraising. I think we're moving into a phase now where our emphasis is going to shift, thank you, is going to shift from simply putting in place controls and cutting and reallocating expenditures through to raising more money so that we can achieve our long-term objective of running more or less in surplus. Please come forward with your ideas. Equally, you may have seen in the latest report from the board that I'm speaking to Israel Bonds. I am beginning to speak to some other corporates about sponsoring different types of activity that the board will undertake, be it the exhibition or other more expansive projects. We're going to put together a menu for these people. If any of you control or work for or have influence at companies that might be supporters of the board, whether they're large scale or small, please come forward with that. Otherwise, that's it. We're sort of moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Anything urgent? You will have a longer opportunity to question your officers at the next meeting. I'm sorry today is curtailed, but we have so many exciting things going on. I hope you will bear with us. International Division, Flora, would you just bear with me? Do you want to ask it very quickly then? Flora, we know you can run marathons.
No, it's just following on from Sheila, our wonderful chair of the Community Issues Division. I want to ask you, Stuart, really, budgeting, fundraising, it comes the same thing. Fundraising is to allow us to have a good budget. I appeal to you as somebody who's worked with the Community Issues Division for a long, long time. We really need a little bit more support as far as monetary support, because what we do impacts over all the 4 divisions. We need this community, we need the Jewish living experience, we need the Seeing Jewish London for the non-Jewish schools, because we have to dispel myths, we have to foster good relationships, we want to have mutual respect and understanding, and we can get it through our division. It will spill over to every other division will benefit if our division is successful, and we need more money.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Richard, International Division.
Thank you. Oh, no. Thank you, Jonathan. It's not been a great season for us Northerners, so we'll just skip over that football-wise. Only thing to add for me is that we've got 6 candidates in what's going to be a hotly contested election for the International Division, and I'd like to wish all of them luck. Any questions, please, on the report? Thanks.
Okay. I better declare an interest here as a Spurs supporter. Defence and Group Relations. Now, Marie is in Israel, on her way to Israel today with the Council of Christians and Jews. Her vice chairman of division, Richard Benson, unfortunately can't be here. So if there are any questions, I'll hear them. If I can respond to them, I will. Otherwise, Marie will respond in due course. In fact, many of the issues in the division we've already covered. Thank you very much. That being the case, what I want to do is to introduce the candidates for the international division, and you'll have an opportunity right now to vote. I would like, first of all, to propose the appointment of Jeremy Friedman, former chair of the Board's Constitution Committee, as the returning officer. Is everyone agreed with that? Yes. Thank you. The result, because it's a number of candidates and a slightly complicated system of voting, the result will be available from the Board's website tomorrow. The candidates, if you would stand up when I read your names, are pleased that deputies can see them. Peter Baum, Richard Cohen, not here I think, John Fulcher, thank you John, Bernard Silva, Bernard, Ivan Sloboda, and Anthony Tricot. Thank you, Anthony. The ballot boxes are at the sides behind these pillars. Yes, they're being held up now for you in true stewardess style. Thank you very much indeed. Please, you've now got just over 5 minutes to vote, and also when you take your seats, please could you come right up to the front and fill up the empty seats, because we have quite a number of people from the general public who have come here for the debate. Our speakers are here, and the debate will be chaired by Chief Executive Gillian Meron, and we're really looking forward to it. Deputies, our next meeting, before I close formally, will be on the 19th of June, and we will have with us to speak Ronald Lauder, the President of the World Jewish Congress, and I look forward to welcoming you there, and I hope to speak to some of you at the end of this meeting. Yes. The returning officer reminds me that when you vote, please put votes in order of numerical preference, not crosses. Thank you. Thank you, deputies. It's not a cross, it's a number. If you just put one cross or more than one, I think they'll probably treat that as a one. Sir. Thank you. Just mean in terms of getting it still. I'm saying on the going down to the body of the floor. No one's going to know. We're staying right here. Speak to Jeremy then and ask him, right? Thank you. Litrot, thank you for coming. Hello. How are you? All right? No, he's here. Oh, not here today, but he's with us. Good. Excellent. What denomination are you? Right, okay. Two people that still
season. I'm not sure you will do, but I think we'll play. Are they coming up, are they? Well, unfortunately, they did play their first playoff for 4 people injured and only got 10. Well, we were only beaten by Middlesbrough, 2 goals difference on. So you're in the playoffs then? We're in the playoff. We should be in the third by 15 points. Oh right. Right. Okay. But Derby played yesterday, didn't they? Yeah, Derby lost to Hull yesterday. Yes. And we played on Friday, and unfortunately, having 2 Israelis in our team didn't help on the top. Was it a score? 2-0. I mean, we played. We ended the game with 10 players for the last half hour. So we did that against Arsenal, and not even having them sent off. Where? Right. You just left? Hey guys, we're close to you now. Hey Harris, how you doing? Can you just make sure? Hello. Yeah, I just thought the attitude didn't get to the heart of the issues that we should be debating about. Speaking I like you already. Okay, excuse me 1 second. Nice to see you. Welcome to the board. We're really delighted. First time. Thank you for coming on us. Not at all. I've been following it a bit on Twitter. Yeah, good. Yes. What do you think? Yeah, but I want people to speak. I might look your way. Jack, no, Jack, they're sitting next. You're putting them too far away. Well, I'm here. Unless you want to move them on. Very published. Can you just make sure it looks right? Gillian, do you want to call people to order? Jonathan will do that. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Sure, go ahead. Yeah, I've got a whole message book from Stronger in. Wes? Excuse me. Wes, what I will do is when you make your 7-minute pitch, I'll ask you to speak from there. We'll then take a number of speakers and then you get 3 minutes each. Up to you if you want to speak from there, you might want to. And then you'll close 3 minutes is not worth it. Okay, what would you rather? Yes, I think you're probably right to stay. Maybe at the end you might want to get there. I'm quite happy to speak from here just in the interest of time. Okay. Do you know what I mean? I don't know about you, Wes. It's just. I mean, I know you're tight, aren't you? Well, if the thing has got an hour, we can maybe do the first one from the podium, and then we can have stay. This is from ladies. Phil, the mics aren't on. I need the mics on. I was wondering whether I could give you this. Yeah, sure. This is David, how are you, my dear friend? Good to see you. Hello. All right. I'm waiting for the mics to be switched on. Okay, I am. I can't. Well, I hope I won't say anything you don't like. I'm aiming not to. I'm waiting for the mics. All right. Yeah, sure. How are you, mate? You're looking completely unchanged. What elixir have you discovered? I went to 10 Downing Street for old codgers. Yeah. They were all looking old. Yeah. What is extraordinary is because they look exactly the same. Let's move on, Daniel. Sorry, the Garrick Club time. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats. Being 80 is not what it was when we were young, is it? If I could ask you to take your seats so that we could start the debate as soon as possible. Hello. Thank you very much. Yes. Oh, sorry. I'll catch you here. Cool. Okay. Ladies. Hello, how are you? Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats so that we could start the debate. Thank you. I did, yes, I couldn't see you. I didn't want you to walk off with that. Thank you. I will. I'll stop that. side. Give it to Sarah.
No, it's all right, actually. No, it's fine. Don't worry. I mean, I'm just conscious that your guys will come back. I'm fine. If we overrun a bit.
If everyone could take their seats, we absolutely are about to start, I promise.
I would start, and then they'll sit. But no, this is important, Gillian. So if you want to keep it, if you sense that there's still a lot of hunger in the room, I'm happy to carry on.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last call for you to take your seats for our EU referendum debate. And I can see you want to take your seats, so that's great. Thank you. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could start the session this afternoon now that the board meeting has finished. Thank you very much. Can I first of all start by welcoming everybody here today. My name is Gillian Merrin, Chief Executive of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and it's my pleasure to be able to chair this historic moment for the Board of Deputies of British Jews, our first ever debate on Europe. I am told that there was not one last time this issue came before the country's consideration. And we are honoured and delighted to be joined by two great friends of our Jewish community. And they are not here for their political parties, they are here to debate whether or not our country should stay members of the European Union. And perhaps I could start by introducing them and thanking them. I'm going to first start by introducing Wes Streeting MP. Wes, if everyone could welcome him. Wes Streeting is the Labour MP for Ilford North. He is the former president of the National Union of Students and is co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on British Jews. If we could please now welcome Daniel Hannan, MEP. Daniel is Conservative MEP for South East England. He is Secretary General of the Alliance of the European Conservatives and Reformists, and he is this month's Europe-Israel Public Affairs MEP of the Month. I think that makes you something of a pin-up, is what people are trying to say. The question for this debate will be the same that is on the ballot papers on the 23rd of June. And the question will be, should the European Kingdom remain a member of the European Union? Oh, will the United... You know what I mean. Sorry, my head's so full of Eurovision, it's difficult to know what to say. Let me start again. Should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? It has been suggested, and with no great science, I am going to ask at the beginning of the debate, I'll ask you now, just a rough indication of where we are at, either remain, leave, or undecided. And the reason for that is at the end we will have a look and see if our very welcome guest speakers have had any influence on us whatsoever. So if you would like to, if anybody would like to indicate, all those who feel they are likely to be in the Remain camp. Thank you. All those who are likely to be in the Leave camp. Thank you. And all those who are undecided. You've got a job of work to do. The rules of the game are going to be as follows. Our panellists will have 7 minutes each to make their pitch to us. And after the opening statements, we will have a round of contributions from the floor. And speakers will have no more than 1.5 minutes. Of course, if you take less, we can have more speakers. And I'm going to be looking for a healthy mix of speakers, people from the Remain, the Leave, and also the undecideds. And feel free to make a point, ask a question, whatever you wish. After the first round, we will ask our panellists to just respond for 3 minutes each. I will then take another round of questions, and then they will sum up at the end, and we will have a final indication of whether they have managed to shift influence or who knows what they might have done to the audience today. So we were debating how it was, who were we going to ask to speak first? And the honour of that will go to Daniel Hannan MEP, because on every level, whether you take his first name, his surname, or the name of the campaign, he comes first. So Daniel Hannan MEP.
Well, Gillian, thank you very much, and well done trying to get this audience, of all audiences, into just 3 different options. Very brave of you. But let me start with a question that is very often put to me by Gentile as well as by Jewish constituents, which I think is germane to the wider question we're debating today. Why does Israel struggle to get a fair hearing in Brussels? I mean, we're all familiar with the phenomenon. The constant criticism, the constant disapprobation, the condemnatory resolutions. I see my old friend and colleague David Sumberg in the front here. He'll bear me out. It was an almost weekly occurrence. Now, of course, Israel, like all countries, sometimes makes mistakes. Of course, Israel, like Britain, like anyone else, sometimes deserves criticism. But nothing explained the sheer intensity, the disproportionate focus. Now, you're all going to have your own theories. Sometimes we're told it's to do with anti-Semitism, or that it's to do with anti-Americanism in Brussels and balancing things up and so on. But having watched the thing at close range for 17 years, I think I've put my finger on what the problem is. The European Union is based on the idea that the nation-state is transient, arbitrary, and ultimately discreditable. And when it sees Israel, it sees the supreme example in human history of the national principle. Here is a people who for 2,000 years are stateless and scattered, but who never lose the aspiration of national statehood. Next year in Jerusalem. And then one day, miraculously, providentially we might almost say, they fulfilled that aspiration. Now, as a believer in national democracy, I find that an incredibly uplifting story. My sympathy, in the literal sense of fellow feeling, is engaged because I see, in a tough area, where autocracy is the norm, a country that is not only democratic, but a gloriously cussed and disputatious democracy. But if your starting point is that the national principle is illegitimate, that we should all be building, tearing down walls instead of building them up, and that regional blocks are the future, and that living under your own laws is a basically backward, atavistic instinct, then the existence of the Jewish state is an affront to the whole concept of European integration. And that's why, with the best will in the world, Israelis will always struggle to get a fair hearing in the European Union. Now, why do I begin with talking about the nation-state in Israel? Because if the European Union were simply about cooperation, if this were simply an international association like the Commonwealth or NATO or the IMF, we wouldn't be having this debate now, we wouldn't be having this referendum. No one would be against it. Right? And let's take it as read that you won't find anyone in this room who is against the idea of working with our immediate neighbours, arbitrating our disputes collectively, achieving together what we can't do singly. You'd have to be mad to be against that. I'm certainly not against that. I speak French, I speak Spanish, I've lived and worked all over Europe. I love Europe. My problem with the EU is that it has become remote and cut off from the people that it purports to represent, and that it steamrollers the democracy of its participating nations. So why do I think we'd be better off out? Well, 4 quick reasons. Number 1, the European Union is obsolete. It's a 1950s, dirigiste, top-down project that dates from an era when freight costs were high and refrigeration was expensive and regional blocks looked like the future. But ladies and gentlemen, that world has been left behind by technological advance. It's as easy now for a British company to do business on the other side of the world with New Zealand as just across the channel with France. In fact, it's easier because a Kiwi company, unlike a French one, will be English-speaking, common law, will use the same accountancy systems and so on. None of those things is true within the single market, despite decades of integration. The year that we joined, 1973, the 28 countries that now make up the EU accounted for 36% of the world economy. In 1980, it was still 30%. Last year, it was 17% and falling. Our exports to the rest of the world are in surplus and growing. Our exports to the EU are in deficit and shrinking. Over the last 10 years, every region on this planet has grown economically, except Antarctica and Europe. The Chinese economy has doubled in size, the Indian economy has doubled in size, the Ethiopian economy has doubled in size, but the economy of the Eurozone, incredibly, is the same size now that it was in 2006. Now, my friends, that's no place for us as a country. We're a merchant people, a maritime people. We have to make our way in the world by what we buy and sell. That means we have to be where the customers are. And increasingly, it's clear that the customers are in more opulent markets across the oceans, not in an enervated and declining Eurozone. Second thing, we're paying for the privilege of belonging to the world's only stagnant customs union. 20 billion gross, 10 billion net. To put that figure in context, during the whole of the last Parliament, the 2010 to 2015 Parliament, if you put all the austerity cuts together, according to the IFS, we saved £36 billion. Over that same Parliament, our gross contribution to the EU was 85 billion, our net contribution 42 billion. Now, I prefer, obviously, to take the gross figure, right? That's what we normally do in politics, right? If I say to you, how much do you pay in council tax? You don't say, well, I should deduct the cost of the bin collection and the street lighting, right? What you count is what you pay. But even if you play the Remain side's game and you insist on taking only the net figure, one clean excision would have wiped out the entire cuts program and still given us enough left over to take a penny off income tax. But I think the greater cost is the democratic one. This is the most gloriously democratic organisation in Britain. It was democratic before we had anything approaching a full franchise. Right? We fought a civil war in this country to establish the principle that laws should not be passed nor taxes levied except by our own elected representatives. And now they are imposed on us by bureaucrats that nobody voted for. If we were, I'll finish with this point, okay? On the 23rd of June, there isn't a status quo on the ballot paper. We can vote for a common market, not a common government, or we can vote to remain on a conveyor belt that leads to fiscal, military, and political integration. I think it's time for this country to raise its eyes to more distant horizons and rediscover its global vocation.
Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be invited to address the Board of Deputies for the first time and on such an important topic, because the choice we make at the end of June is potentially the biggest decision that this country will take in a generation. And depending on the outcome of that decision, it's a decision that will have ramifications for this country, not just over the course of this year or this decade, but potentially over the course of the next century as the United Kingdom decides the direction that we take and potentially our national destiny in the process. And I'm arguing this afternoon that we should remain in the European Union because we are stronger, safer and better off. Picking up where Daniel left off on the economy, the single market is the best economic relationship we can have with the European Union, and it has been striking throughout the course of this entire referendum debate and all of the work that we've been doing on the Treasury Committee, looking at the economic implications of our membership and the alternatives available, that the Leave campaign cannot point to a single country in the world that has a better relationship with that single market than we do as members of the European Union. And it brings enormous benefits. We can trade without tariffs. We get a say over the rules. It expands our home market from 65 million consumers to 500 million consumers. Figures estimate that there are 3 to 4 million jobs linked to the European Union. In fact, throughout the course of this debate, we can trade statistics and argue about which statistic is more valid than the other. But the truth is that whoever's producing these analyses puts these figures in the same ballpark. 3 to 4 million jobs, the impact of leaving being equivalent to losing £4,300 per household each year. Daniel talks about the cost of EU membership. The Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies puts our net contribution at £5.7 billion, which equates to 24 pence per person per day. Given the enormous benefits, I don't think that's a hugely costly sum. In fact, it's 1% of our budget. The Leave campaign argues we should use far more inflated figures, and that's why the UK Statistics Authority has written to them previously to warn that their figures are potentially misleading. And as we've seen, over the course of the last century, for better or for worse, if the economy works well, the country does well. If the economy collapses, people's jobs, their livelihoods, their homes are put at risk. Why on earth would we leave an economic arrangement that is working so well for our country? And of course, it's not just an economic case. It's also about our security and about our safety and about how we tackle the big issues of this century. Our security cooperation makes us better placed to deal with crime and with security, whether it's the European arrest warrant that allows us to arrest people across the continent and to bring them to justice here in the UK, or cooperation on tackling terrorism, whether on our shores, across the European Union, or across the rest of the world. Being members of the European Union has brought enormous benefits in terms of employment rights, in terms of human rights. And whilst this country can be enormously proud of our own domestic record on these issues, we can be proud, even more proud, of the fact that we have brought democracy and human rights to a conflict that has been plagued and ravaged by war in every century of our history. And I think that's often lost in debates about the European Union, that enormous achievement, not just of bringing peace to Western Europe, but also as the Iron Curtain fell, taking democracy and human rights to the east of our continent as well. And when you think about the big issues facing the world, like climate change, for example, we're better placed to deal with these issues if we're working together rather than tackling them alone. Now, we've been accused on the Remain campaign of running Project Fear. Actually, it's Project Fact. And just because the facts are slightly alarming, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about the risks, whether it's the risk to 3 million jobs or the risk to trade, where 44% of our exports are to the European Union, to the common market, valued at 229 billion in 2014, or to inward investment, where the UK is the largest recipient of foreign direct investment in Europe. And think about the implications of having to renegotiate our trading relationship, either with the European single market, in which case we're going to have to potentially, as other countries do, make contributions to the budget, or abide by the rules without having any say in them, including free movement of people, which is a vexatious issue, I understand, in lots of parts of the country during the course of this referendum. There isn't a better relationship than we can point to than we have now. And if we don't want to be part of the single market, then that is a fundamental shift, not just in our economic policy, but our foreign policy, away from the democracies of the West to the dictatorships of the East. And that's not where I want to see this country realigning itself in the 21st century. We'd also need to think on a very practical level about who's going to renegotiate all of these trade agreements, whether it's individual trade agreements within the existing EU member states or for single market access, but also with the rest of the world, because so many of our existing trading relationships outside of the European Union are negotiated through the European Union. And who's going to do it? We don't have the Board of Trade anymore. We have a business department where most of our people engaged in issues of trade and negotiating trade agreements are over in Brussels, where the action's at. Who's going to negotiate this? And how long will it take? How long will it take after we have left the European Union within a space of 2 years? How long will it take to negotiate these trade agreements with the EU member states or with the rest of the world? Finally, broadcasters and others have a responsibility to present balance in the debate. And so it's common to hear, as we've had this morning, two people on a platform giving counterposing views. But it's not just about giving equal airtime. It's about making sure that we're giving adequate weight to the arguments that are being made and, of course, who is making them. And we should listen. We should listen to the IMF. We should listen to the G20. We should listen to the Governor of the Bank of England. We should listen to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. We should listen to the majority of parliamentarians. We should listen to the vast majority of businesses. We should listen to the vast majority of trade unions. And we should listen very carefully to the risks that they set out of the consequences of leaving. This isn't just a debate about trade. This is a debate about our place in the world and how we exercise influence and sovereignty in a world where global power is shifting, the threats are changing, the uncertainty is greater. We can be proud of the leadership that we show to the world through the European Union and proud of our leadership on the global stage outside the European Union. But our influence will be greater still if we remain not just within the European Union, but at the heart of the European Union. And that's why I believe we are stronger, safer, better off, and you should vote to remain at the end of June.
Thank you very much, Wes, and thank you very much, Daniel. We've got a lot of interest in the room. I'm going to be asking, first of all, I'm going to look for 3 speakers from the Remain group. Let me see. So, 1, 2, Bernard, yes, and 3. So we have 3 Remains. If you'd like to come forward to the mic at the front. This lady here. Dory, I didn't call you, I'm sorry. No, that was just in my dreams there. But there will be another opportunity, don't worry. Can I have 3 from the Leave camp? Vicky, the gentleman there, and the lady here. Yes, if you'd like to come forward. And can I have 3 from the Undecided? Let me see. Susan? By the way, if you're not a deputy, you are, of course, we'd be delighted to hear what you've got to say. You're here as an equal partner. So, lady here? Yes? And, excuse me, and the gentleman at the front. Okay, so if you could give your name, and then you will have no more than 1.5 minutes. If you take less, we can, of course, have more speakers. Please.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Jeremy Michelson. I support the Remain camp because I've always looked at it very much, rather than an economic basis, on a political basis. Maybe because I grew up in the years after World War II. But I feel very strongly that 2 things are happening that make it necessary for us to remain. One is the rise of an aggressive imperialistic Russia and Iran, China, etc., countries outside of Europe that have a very strong set of priorities and a very strong set of an aggressive way of going about things. I feel that we in the West seem to somehow be lacking in self-confidence, lacking in an idea about what we're about in terms of being liberal democracies. And I fear that although, of course, if we left, we would still be a part of NATO, I do feel that what would actually happen is that if Britain was to leave, I think it would set loose vociferous tendencies within Europe. I think as everybody started to look to their own immediate short-term interests, it would send, I think, a terrible message. And I think this would actually lead to not just...
Jeremy, if you could wind up, please.
I'm sorry. A reduction in the ability of the EU, but also, I believe, in the long run, I think it would weaken NATO as well. So for very much for political reasons, I am very much in favour of remaining in Europe.
Thank you. Bernard.
Bernard Silver, Western Marble Arch Synagogue. Whether you're a Romanian or a Brexiteer, I think you'll agree with me that that was one of the best debates we've had in all the media coverage that there hasn't been. So I'd like to really thank both our contributors today. You know, if you had your formative education in this country, you will have learnt history, and the history you'll have learnt would have been that we fought wars with the Vikings, that's the Scandinavians, and the Romans, that's the Italians, and the Dutch, and the Spanish, and the Germans, and the French. As my history teacher put it, if you forget the lessons of history, you're bound to repeat them next term. I must tell you that what really concerns me is only that one issue, and that is I do not want to go to war with our neighbours in Europe again. We haven't had a war since 1945. My first lesson in school was how to put my gas mask on. I don't want that for our kids and our grandchildren. As a Jew, that's the one issue that concerns me. I'm not really interested in the economics. I'm not really interested in the topics of migration or any of those things. The one overriding issue is that if Europe stays united, Europe will not go to war with each other. Thank you.
I've got the feeling that this is going to be very brief because the last sentence was basically what I was going to say.
Can we have your name?
Oh, sorry. My name is Karen Lewin.
Thank you.
And I'm here. I also am not interested, well, I am, but not in this case, about the economics. I'm more concerned about what's happening about NATO. I'm concerned about the fact that, no, there won't be a European army. I'm not sure if I care about that particularly, but I'm very concerned about MI5 and CIA and what's going on in the background. I'm fed up with hearing about the economics because there won't be any economics if there's no security behind the scenes.
That was lovely and brief. Thank you very much. An example to everyone. Vicky.
Vicky Harris, Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue. I'm concerned with how we could cope with a lack of border control over EU citizens entering the UK. We do not have enough houses, we do not have enough schools, we do not have enough hospitals even today. Switzerland is outside the UK, the EU, forgive me. They have a trading agreement. It is not true to say that anyone can simply come in as an EU citizen and live in Switzerland. They turned me down. I know that in Switzerland, if you want to come in as an EU citizen, you have to have a job to come into. That is quite different from untrammeled access to the countries that have trading agreements. And finally, I ask, if Mr. Cameron says that our security is severely threatened, even perhaps looking at another war, if we leave, why did he say, before he started negotiating, that if the deal wasn't good enough, he would walk away?
Sandra Dangor. In 1975, I voted to
go into the European Union. Why? Because I went to a French school, I had a French education. 20 years ago, my thoughts started to change. Why? Because of that very same French education. We in the UK are very, very different to those across the Channel. My problem is with Brussels. It is an unaccountable, democratically deficit organization. It hasn't signed off the accounts in 17 years. It is very good at micromanaging absolutely everything that we do. But when there is a big crisis like the Eurozone crisis, which is still ongoing, the immigration crisis, it is completely powerless to do anything. Why? Because Germany pulls the strings and nobody is able to agree. All the other 27 countries cannot agree on what the best way to go forward is. And that is only going to continue. And the reason why I am voting to leave is because I am afraid that the strains on the EU are so great that it is going to implode from within, and we are better off out in order to be able to pick up the pieces yet again when they start turning on each other. Vote to leave. Thank you.
Anthony Feather, West London Synagogue. I mean, the facts are, and we've got a lot of sort of theories and suppositions that economically we're going to be worse off if we leave. Rubbish. If we leave, we will get ourselves away from an economic group which is going into disarray. Unemployment in Europe is double what it is in this country. We have the 5th strongest economy in the world, despite being tied into a group that is basically, in many ways, corrupt and fraudulent. We heard about this lack of the accounts being audited for 19 years. Why is that? I would like a direct question to the person who wants us to remain. Why cannot we see audited accounts of what goes on in Europe? It's absolutely ridiculous. It's a 61 billion trade deficit we have with Europe. Is that good? It's wrong. It's crazy. And we pay to stay in. We pay 8.5 billion. They kindly give us back 3 or 4 billion of our own money and say, thank you, you can stay by paying. It's not rubbish. In terms of war, we've had no war in Europe before there was an economic union. NATO and the Allies have kept the peace. The Eurovision Song Contest does more for the unity of Europe than the European Union.
Thank you. Now that is controversial.
Susan Pascoe, one reason that I'm in the undecided camp is because I'm uncertain of the effect if in the future there are EU restrictions on shechita, the way we slaughter animals, and restrictions on Brit Milah, circumcision of our Jewish boys at 8 days old. Would we not be better off outside the EU? Thank you.
David Sandberg, North Staffordshire Hebrew congregation. My question really is to Dan, though I'm sure Wes will want to comment. And may I say, in parenthesis, there has been no greater friend. I served in the European Parliament for 10 years, no greater friend of our community and the causes that we espouse than Daniel Hannan. And it's a delight to see him here. My question, Dan, is really this. Of course, you paint the golden picture. Come out of this sclerotic organization, regain our freedom, make our own laws, let our courts decide on those laws, make our own immigration policy, trade with the world. It's a wonderful scenario, and it appeals greatly to me. But to be honest, my difficulty, why I'm undecided, is I cannot ignore all the voices. All the voices from the great and the good, and all the voices from one section which you have championed, the Anglosphere, the Association of English-Speaking Peoples. All of them say the United States, our greatest ally, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, for God's sake, stay in. And does not that, Dan, give you a slight moment of reflection that perhaps after so many years inside the European Union, it's dangerous for our security, our freedom and our peace to come out?
Well, thank you to all the contributors. I'm now going to ask our two panellists to respond for the first time, and I'm going to call on Wes Streeting first of all. Wes.
Well, thank you very much for all of those speeches and questions. There are just a few things I wanted to point out in response. I mean, firstly, I think it's a good question to David Cameron, incidentally, as to how we entertain the prospect of leaving and is now saying leaving would be a disaster. I think the truth is, and without intruding too much on the private grief of the Conservative Party, because there's enough of it in my own party, David Cameron, I think, has had a party management issue on this. I have no doubt that whatever the outcome of his renegotiation, he would have been arguing for Britain to remain in the European Union. But, you know, there we are. I'm not here to defend David Cameron. Lack of border control. I mean, it is a myth. There is border control. We're not part of Schengen, which is the free movement area. We never have been. And there are border checks at the border. In fact, since 2010, we've refused entry to almost 6,000 European Economic Area nationals at the UK border. Over 3,800 of these were stopped at Calais before they even entered the country. Don't pretend that there aren't problems or challenges, but I don't believe that they would get easier outside of the European Union. And my own constituency caseload tells me that the issues with immigration are far deeper and more homegrown when it comes to the problems with our immigration system. In terms of accountability, we exercise power and influence at every level of the European Union. In fact, I think over a 10-year period, we've agreed with 97% of decisions taken at the European Council. In fact, there are decisions on tax transparency, for example, where the UK's influence has been to the detriment of what I would like to see in those sorts of areas. But you know, there is a strong underlying point there, which is that UK influence has protected, for example, the City of London, where the European Central Bank wanted currency clearing houses to be located in the Eurozone, and we blocked it. In fact, we took the Central Bank to the European Court of Justice to make sure they couldn't do it. It's one of the reasons why so many businesses in the city are arguing that we should remain. On growth, it's just worth pointing out the Eurozone expanded at its fastest pace in a year during the first quarter of 2016, and at 0.6% growth, it's pretty meagre, but faster than the US and the UK. We're still at the tail end of a pretty bad global financial crash that impacts on the Eurozone very hard. So don't just take short-term figures as an indication of where the European Union and the single market is going in the longer term. And finally, on Eurovision, having endured the pain of the results process last night, I do not think that our treatment at the hands of our friends across the European Union has done much to further the cause of peace. I do think we should be listening, though, to people like Christine Lagarde at the IMF, the World Bank President, the OECD Secretary-General, Mark Carney, the NATO Secretary-General, the former President of the Association of Chief Police Officers, the Director of Europol, the Home Secretary, all of those serious figures on both economy and security who argue that not only will we be worse off, but we will be less safe if we leave the European Union. The point that was made about the damage that we will do to Western alliances like NATO and to Western influence in the world was incredibly well made, and that's something we should bear in mind if we seek to damage the European Union and our own national self-interest by leaving.
Daniel Hannan.
Wes pointed out that we don't have a Board of Trade anymore. And in a sense, that's our problem. The day we joined the EU, we gave Brussels 100% control of our trade policy. Now, the EU has no trade agreement with Australia, which means that we don't. Why not? It's being held up by some Italian tomato growers. The Italian tomato growers may be right or wrong, but how on earth did we put ourselves in a position where we are facing blocks vis-à-vis Australia because of an unrelated dispute somewhere else? It was reported yesterday that the EU trade agreement with Canada is now being vetoed by Romania and Bulgaria because of an unrelated argument about visas. Again, we'd have had unrestricted free trade with Canada all the way through, but it's now dependent on this other issue. Now, in an age when Europe looked as though it was going to be the future, when it looked like the center of the world economically, maybe that was a trade-off worth making. But why do we cling to the world's one declining continent? Why don't we lift our eyes? Quickly on the budget. I'm going to come back to this point about gross versus net. If I were to say to you, good news everybody, income tax, basic rate income tax isn't actually 20p in the pound. It's in fact 0 because it's all given back in roads and schools and hospitals. You would regard that as a preposterous argument. And yet that's what we do when we count the net figure. Because it assumes that all the money that we hand over to the EU and that is then spent in the UK is being spent as we would have chosen, but it's not. It's often being spent buying the loyalty of powerful and articulate interest groups. In question of security, look, there are uncertainties and risks whatever we do. That's the way the world is. Don't confuse familiarity with certainty. But it must surely be safer to be in a position to mitigate those risks ourselves by taking back control than to hand power to people who may not have our best interests at heart. And that would be my answer to the question of Shahita and all the rest of it. It must, I can't promise what the future will be either way, but it must be safer to have our own decision-making. The big question about war, which came up from Bernard and others. Just ask one question. Is the EU a cause of peace in Europe, or doesn't it make more sense to see the European Union as a consequence of a European peace based on the defeat of fascism, the spread of democracy, and the NATO alliance? Does jamming all these different countries together in the way that has happened over the euro and Schengen, you look at the way that German newspapers write about Greeks now and the way that Greek newspapers write about Germany, does forcing these countries into one set of policy make them get on better or worse? Is it stoking or soothing national antagonisms? And then finally, on David Sundberg's very good question about the advice we're getting from Obama and the rest of it. I mean, I would take President Obama far more seriously if he was prepared to practice what he preaches. If he said the Organization of American States will have supremacy over Congress, there'll be a pan-American parliament in Havana, and that it will be able to strike down acts of Congress. There'll be a pan-American central bank in, Buenos Aires, and it will administer our currency, which will be the pan-American peso. If he were prepared to do that, then he might be in a position to lecture the rest of us about giving up our democracy. But the kinds of people, I'm going to finish on this exact point, the kinds of people pushing it, the diplomats, the civil servants, the tax-free, gourmandizing, Michelin-starred IMF bureaucrats, they love the EU because they arrive there and they perceive a system designed by and for people like them, but it's not in the interests of ordinary people.
Okay. I'm now looking for 2 from each group, and I'm going to ask you to be extremely brief. Can I ask for 2 undecideds, please, who don't usually speak? So, Peter and the gentleman there. This gentleman here, who's looking around, that's right. Can I ask when you come up, can you mix yourselves up a bit? I've asked for that, for a bit more energy. Lots of energy. Hold on a minute, Peter. Can I have 2 Remains, please? 2 Remains, the gentleman right at the back, and Sheila there, and also can I have 2 Leaves, please? 2 Leaves. Right at the back, there, yes? And Rosalind. I'd love to take a point of order, but it isn't actually the board meeting, so I'm going to continue. Can I ask, the President takes points of order, not the Chief Exec. So can I ask you, Peter?
Peter Baum, Southend and Westcliff Hebrew Congregation. I'm actually undecided, but I think I can make you decide in 2 minutes of me finishing off here. And it's to do with the EU bailout, which we've all heard about. Now, just imagine, instead of being in London on a very summer spring day, it's raining and we're in Ireland. And there is a proprietress of a hotel, Gillian O'Meara.
Can't hear you, need to go back. Just stay there.
Gillian is the owner of a hotel in Ireland, and a very rich tourist comes in and wants to look at all her rooms in her hotel, and he deposits a €500 note and gives it to Gillian to look after whilst he happens to look at all the rooms in the hotel. With that 500 note, Gillian thinks, okay, I haven't paid my cleaning bill yet. I better go to the laundry, and she pays the owner of the laundrette the cleaning bill. The owner of the laundrette says, God, I haven't paid my pub bill. He goes to pay the publican. The publican says, God, I haven't paid the local prostitute. He goes and pays the local...
It's a good moment to say you need to wind up.
He goes to pay for... The prostitute says, I've got to pay the priest.
I'm afraid that you're out of time now, and thank you. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Next speaker, thank you. Sheila.
Thank you. Sheila Gewolb, Cardiff United Synagogue. I have a question, please, for Daniel. I have a daughter who lives and owns and operates businesses in Gibraltar. Gibraltar has 600 Jewish people there out of a population of 30,000, 2% of the population. If we were to leave the European Union, you may as well put out the lights in Gibraltar. The border with Spain would close and it would go back to the days of Franco. I believe the Defence Secretary Philip Hammond was out there garnering support for the Remain campaign. Could you address how Gibraltar would cope if we left, please?
My name is Amos Schonfield. We've seen a lot of inflammatory rhetoric very recently. No one brought this up actually in our meeting, unfortunately, but Boris Johnson likened the Remain campaign, the EU project, likened that to Nazism, which is a bit disgusting, to be honest. I wanted to try something a bit more conciliatory. Could Daniel and Wes, could you please tell us what you find is the most compelling argument of the other side? I'm just quite interested, really.
3 minutes, I can't know.
They will only have 3 minutes to say that. That's a great question, yes. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Charles Braunstein. I'm not a board member. Just a quick point. When people discuss what's in my Friday night dinner table, Brexit comes up every time. And I changed my profile picture to say vote leave. So it ends up all coming towards me. And the point sometimes that people get very sensitive about is regarding immigration. Now, people say I'm very pro-immigration. The whole Leave campaign is all about limiting immigration. The point I kind of want to ask the question is about sovereignty, it's about control. It's about whether we can say, yes, we want to elect MPs who are pro-immigration. It's not about being anti-immigration when you say vote leave. We've got MEPs in Brussels who have very limited influence on creating legislation. The legislation comes from the Commission, who have been appointed from the largest group in the EU. Who do we know? How many groupings do we know? So I guess my question is that shouldn't we have a bit more faith in Britain, and that if we do leave, do you actually think that everything, I guess to Wes, maybe it's on the leave, that everything's going to collapse? Our employment law is going to collapse. Are we that depressed about what Britain can do in terms of protecting workers' rights that suddenly we think that we've got to rely on the French or the Germans to tell us how to do it? So that's my question.
Thank you.
Rosalind Pine, 40 years ago I was tricked into voting to stay, and I fell for that, regretted it ever since. And I should also declare that I'm first generation British, and my whole history of my family goes back hundreds of years. First of all, I just would like to dispel the obvious myth about war, about safety, because there you have Yugoslavia. You have a forced collaboration of different groups of people, and the whole thing imploded. So where was the safety of Europe to prevent that disaster? The second point was, Daniel Hammond he's made the point before, of course, all these frantic teams of 20-somethings letter writers drafting these letters at Downing Street from big business and so on and so on. Of course, the whole of the EU is dictated to by the big businesses, the big corporations who write the small print, and the small people are left out, and that's why they're suffering. It is for big business and big corporation. But today, I think the most cogent argument for leave was presented in a letter in today's Sunday Times by 8 prominent
Germans from different walks of life, including a former president of the German Federation of Industry. And I'll just read you the last paragraph.
Just
in
a
which
warning,
he says,
you only have a few seconds
he
left.
says, EU reform is a losing battle, and many of us envy the British for having this debate in this referendum and the chance to disembark from an EU project whose integration now threatens to undermine rather than uphold the liberty and prosperity of our continent.
I'm now going to hand to Daniel for his closing remarks.
Well, these being my closing remarks, I'm first going to start with an advert. If you've been convinced by what I've said, I have a book. Why Vote Leave? I wish I had £9.3 million of taxpayers' money to send it all out at the government's expense, but I haven't, but they are on sale at the back, and I'll be very happy to dedicate copies to anyone who wants. Now, look, we stand at a crossroads, okay? What happens if we vote to leave? Well, important to grasp that Brexit is a process, not an event. The day after it comes into effect looks just like the day before. That's the day that we can start to diverge. All of our technical standards will still be the same, all of the bilateral deals on healthcare and so on, all of the trade arrangements, until one side or the other chooses to do something different. Brexit will be a gradual trajectory towards the rest of the world. And the person who put this best was the leader of the In campaign, Lord Rose. He said it won't be a step change, it'll be a gentle process. Quite right. And he went on to say, before his horrified spin doctors could shut him up, he went on to say, after 5 years you will notice no difference, after 10 years, the beginning of some change, and then after 15 years, that's when you'll notice the change. And that is exactly what Brexit will be. It'll be a gradual reorientation by this country away from the bit of the world that is failing towards more opulent overseas markets. What if we vote, on the other hand, to stay? Well, look, just ask one question. Look at the PM's renegotiation, all that travel, all those arguments, 2 years, and then what? Not one power back, not one penny off the contributions, not even a treaty change, nothing. Ask yourselves just one question. If this is how we are treated now, the second largest financial contributor, before we have the vote, how would we be treated the day after voting to remain? Voting to stay in is not the same as voting to stay put. Voting to stay in means acquiescing in everything that is coming our way. I'm going to finish by quoting a story because this is one of the only audiences where I'm sure you'll all be familiar with it. It's the story about my original namesake, Daniel at Belshazzar's feast. You remember he's asked to talk about what's going to happen to the great multinational empire that he finds himself in. And what does he say to the king? He says, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. The EU is not a settled dispensation. It's evolving. And it's currently dealing with these twin crises, the Euro crisis and the Schengen crisis, and it's responding to both, as it responds to everything, with more and more integration. Now, we have other options. Because we kept pound, because we kept our borders, we have an alternative. We can reorient to the rest of the world. And the question we face on the 23rd of June is, do we make all of the EU's problems our problems, or do we have the confidence, as the fifth largest economy in the world, the fourth military power, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, the country with the world's most widely spoken language and capital city, do we have the confidence to live under our own laws, trading with our friends and allies in Europe, but governing ourselves?
Thank you, Daniel. Wes Streeting.
In the event that we vote to leave, something called Article 50 will be triggered almost immediately, and we will have 2 years to negotiate a new relationship with the remaining member states of the European Union, which every existing member state will have to agree to. Otherwise, after 2 years, our relationship is gone, we're trading under WTO rules, and we are significantly disadvantaged. And I think one of the interesting things about the work we've been doing on the Treasury Committee in the House of Commons, I would have had a book, but Tales from the Treasury Committee I'm not sure will be a bestseller, is that even people on the Leave side of the argument concede this. It's not just Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, who's talking about Brexit being the biggest domestic risk to our financial stability. Boris Johnson's own Chief Economic Advisor predicted an economic shock. Dominic Cummings, the Leave campaign director, accepted that in the short term there would definitely be job losses. Aaron Banks, the Leave.eu founder, described the impact on lost GDP as a bargain basement price worth paying. And it will be families and individuals who will be paying the price, not the people who are making these arguments. In terms of what are the most compelling arguments of the Leave side, I think it boils down to two things I think really resonate. One is about sovereignty and determining our own laws, and the other is immigration and giving people a sense that we can control our borders better. And if I voted to leave the European Union on that basis, I think I will feel very disappointed. Because you will find that immigration is an economic necessity, and many of the challenges we face in our immigration system are a result of our own rules and our border agency, not as a result of the European Union. And secondly, on sovereignty. It's not enough in the world that we live in today to simply say, stop the world, I want to get off, and I'm going to create my own rules. You cannot, globalization is the process, not the event, and you can either try and shape it in your own interests, or you can try and resign from it and be victims of it. And that's the choice the country faces. Fundamentally, it's a fundamental choice about how we exercise power and influence in the world as it changes. And I do think across the European Union there is a sense across different countries, whether it's on the degree of integration or issues like migration, how we deal with the biggest refugee crisis, there are really big issues where I think, there's a fallacy where we think we're the only ones in Europe that are having this debate. People across every member state are having this sort of debate. And if we had behaved like leaders and partners in the European Union, we would have had a better chance at shaping its direction, and we still can. None of our European partners want to leave, and we shouldn't pretend that if we inflict our exit on them with consequences for the Eurozone and the Western alliances that we've talked about this afternoon, like NATO, we shouldn't think that we will get an easy ride in the process, because we would not behave in that way ourselves. So I think for all of the arguments that I set out earlier, that we'd be safer, stronger and better off, we should remain in the European Union.
Thank you very much. Well, you've heard it now, so we'll just take one last indicative vote. Can I see all those who now feel they would like to remain? And those who would like to leave? And those who are undecided? To our dear friends on the panel, you've got some work to do still, I think we can say. I'd now like to call on Jonathan Arkush, President of the Board of Deputies, to give a vote of thanks.
Deputies and also our welcome guests, I really feel invigorated, educated and better informed now than I was before. I am so pleased that the board has been privileged to host this debate. I think that we have heard some amazing contributions from Wes and from Daniel, and I want to express our appreciation to them for giving up some time in the middle of their Sunday to come and elucidate and enlighten us on some of the arguments. I'm proud of the Board of Deputies for taking the courage to hold this event, to inform ourselves and the community, and for being at the cutting edge of Jewish community opinion. But I particularly want to close by thanking Gillian for chairing it. I hope you've enjoyed the debate, and I want to close by thanking Daniel and Wes for doing such a wonderful job today of helping to inform us and for stimulating the marvellous questions that we've had. Onwards and upwards for the board, 1 year on after our election. I look forward to seeing you all on the 19th of June.